In life, there are three basic needs: food, water, and shelter. Yet, I'd say food has become more than just simply a need, hasn't it? This goes without saying, people eat and drink just for fun. There are whole genres of content on YouTube dedicated to, well, just food. Whether it be reviewing food, cooking food, eating food, such content can be both entertaining as well as informative to people. For me though, food is not just something to be eaten or to be enjoyed or even just to be talked about, but rather I'd also say it's a symbol of vulnerability. And I'd say this is also true for the main thing I talk about on this channel, anime as well. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, Roger, what the heck are you babbling on about this time? Well, I'll tell you. Now, immediately what came to mind for me in discussing this topic was Naoki Urasawa's classic manga and classic anime, Monster. I present to you, dear viewer, episode 18, 5 Sugars. Or Chapter 32 if you're reading the manga. So in this storyline, a man named Mr. Rosso hires Nina to work at his cafe. He's definitely a pleasant man in the story, but there's always a feeling of something eating at him in the background. At the end of the episode, he comes clean. He used to be a hitman. There was one particular event that made him unable to kill again though. So one day Mr. Rosso has his aim on his target, a man sitting outside drinking a cup of coffee. And then he sees him put 5 teaspoons of sugar into his coffee. Mr. Rosso can't help but hesitate. In that moment, he remembers someone else who also puts 5 teaspoons of sugar into his coffee. Himself. Now, there's a lot of different things I've taken away from this story over the years, but one thing that I connected with almost immediately was this vulnerability attached to Mr. Rosso's target. Our enjoyment of meals is when we're at our most vulnerable, but I'd say it's also when we're at our most human. Enjoying a good meal, or in the case of this story, a good cup of coffee, regardless of one's reasoning for doing it, on a subconscious level, it brings attention to this one truth. We must eat and we must drink to survive. If we starve, if we thirst, then we perish. So by eating or drinking in public, we're showing that vulnerability, that need to survive. At the same time, it's also something we all share in common just as human beings. Seeing someone eat or drink, especially when it's the same thing you also tend to have, it lets you see that humanity within them. Now we don't need to go as far as murder to see this vulnerability when it comes to sharing a meal, because there are many stories in which sharing a meal also helps people overcome that vulnerability. So many moons ago, my good friend Joe from the channel Pause and Select, maybe you've heard of it, he made a video called In Praise of Humble Ramen that's sadly no longer up, but it discusses ramen as this symbolism for characters being down on their luck or being underdogs. There's many different reasons for this.
Ramen had its roots in imperialism.
But one of the reasons cited in the video is that the rise of instant ramen made it kind of understood as this cheap, fast dish to make. One of the more noteworthy uses of this symbolism is one that maybe you were already thinking of when I brought it up. And that's, one of the most popular anime and manga ever, Naruto. Because within the story of Naruto, our titular character has, throughout all this time, been viewed as sort of this outcast in his village, due to the nine-tailed fox being sealed within him. He's able to overcome this at Ramen Ichiraku, or in the English version, Ichiraku Ramen. Now, this may come as a surprise to some people, but I'd say this relationship is actually contrasted quite well in a filler episode of the show. I believe it's episode 177 of Shippuden, where Naruto tries browsing through the masks at a shop, only to be kicked out and yelled at by the storekeeper. Now, I'd imagine if that storekeeper sold ramen, he would have felt much differently about Naruto. Because at Ichiraku Ramen, they always viewed him as a welcome customer. It's also something that he's able to share with his mentor Iruka, and through that, it's one of the ways he's able to be guided along the right path in life and to be able to make a name for himself in the show. Now, ramen is a pretty prominent motif within Naruto, but there are some shows that use it in kind of smaller ways. I think of episode 3 of Gakuen Utopia Manabi Straight as being a good example of this, where the student council is meeting with the other schools to discuss what each is doing about the school fair. Yet, throughout the entire time, Manabi is unable to make any sort of suggestion. This shot of her just standing there blankly pretty much says it all. Now, for context to those who may have not watched the show or may have not heard of it, this is the same character who, in just the first episode of the series, with all of her energy and all of her school spirit, she bursts into the scene to win over her bored and disinterested classmates, and became president of the student council on her first day of school. It's such a stark contrast. However, there's a scene right after where they all eat ramen together, and Manabi's able to vent to her friends, and through that she just quickly gets back on her feet, as if all of this was just a minor setback. Now there's one last show I want to bring up because it's centered entirely around food helping people go through vulnerabilities. And that show is Koufuku Graffiti, which funnily enough also has an episode that features ramen, but I'm not going to be talking about that specifically. Just more of a general analysis on the story. So to catch you up to speed, the main character, named Machiko, she lost her grandma about a year before the story starts, and her parents work overseas. She has an aunt who takes care of her, but her aunt's always working, like throughout the story. So Machiko just tends to sit around in her empty and lonely apartment. However, there's a series of events that occurs in the show, and through that, her cousin Kirin starts going to the same prep school as her on weekends. Thus, Kirin ends up staying over Machiko's house every week, since Machiko and the prep school are in Tokyo, and Kirin, well, let's just say she isn't. I actually don't remember where she's from. So one of the main ways they bond together is through, well, cooking. And even sometimes their friend from that prep school, Sheena, ends up joining them. These meals are able to help Machiko overcome the death of her grandma, which has been pretty much plaguing her throughout the entire story, as well as give her the sense of family that she had been lacking that entire time. Not to mention that cooking was also something that Machiko bonded with her grandma over, so she's able to make new memories now with her friends. To put it in other words, by sharing meals together, you're not only putting your vulnerabilities forth, many times you're able to overcome those same vulnerabilities as well. Now, before I close off, I gotta come clean about my reasonings for making this video really at all. So generally, I'm quite uncomfortable eating meals with people I'm not that close to. It's not to say I'm against it inherently. Obviously, I've eaten meals with people multiple times, and I'm probably gonna do it again at some point. But the vulnerability of eating a meal with someone I don't know all that well can feel a bit embarrassing to me. Heck, I don't really like if people ask me if I'm hungry or to say that I'm hungry, because to me it shows this weakness that I really don't like showing to people. One specific example of this that I can remember off the top of my head was the AniTube meetup of Anime Expo 2018. Because I had every intention on going to it and meeting my fellow content creators, I thought it was going to be a lot of fun. But ultimately, I kinda backed out at the last minute. At the time I had told people that I wasn't feeling well, and that wasn't incorrect to say. But the truth of the matter is, I really didn't want to eat in front of them. If one doesn't know much about Anime Expo, you gotta understand those lines are just absurdly long. And because of that, I hadn't eaten pretty much all day. So I just left to go eat by myself, and then I headed back to my Airbnb. As silly as it may sound, I got kinda psyched out of going to the meetup because I didn't want to be hungry in front of people I didn't know all too well. Yet admittedly, it shouldn't be anything to be embarrassed about, to be quite honest. Because throughout this video, you'll see that eating meals together is more than just simply eating a meal. It's more than just simply surviving. It's sharing something with another person. Whether it be indirectly, in the case of Mr. Rosso for Monster, where he was able to see that man as a human being through the same taste in coffee. Whether it be with a mentor figure, like in Naruto, where he doesn't feel forced to act like this class clown, he can just kind of chill out and be himself at this restaurant. Whether it be with a group of friends to get over just kind of a bad day, like in Manabi Straight. Or it can be even a way to overcome loss, like in the case of Koufuku Graffiti. One day I'd definitely like to overcome this embarrassment of eating I have. But while I can't exactly share a meal with you through this video, that'd be a little weird, I hope I was able to share an interesting idea with everybody, and perhaps bring my own vulnerabilities to the forefront. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.
それより食事を楽しみましょう。 食事は人の心を豊かにし、エネルギーと明日への活力を生み出してくれます。ここに速さは必要ありません。味を堪能しながら歯で噛み砕いて食道と芯に流し込む。そして。
Hey, so I'm back with just a quick addendum of stuff I couldn't fit into the video itself, but I still thought was interesting and worth a mention anyway. So going back to Monster, there's another instance where it shows food taking advantage of people's weaknesses, and that's with the whiskey bonbons. These managed to poison and kill 2 different parties in the show. There's the hospital director, Dr. Heinemann, as well as his 2 colleagues, and also Detective Patara and the other 2 detectives. So with Dr. Heinemann, he criticized Tenma for saving Johann instead of the mayor, but then he takes advantage of the media blitz surrounding Johann for his own benefit, believing that it would bring more good publicity to the hospital. With all of this attention, Johann gets sent a lot of gifts, and the whiskey bonbons are within that pile. Dr. Heinemann and the other 2 doctors get a bit overconfident, and as a result, they let their guard down and eat something that isn't theirs, which leads to their demise. Not knowing, of course, that Johann planted the whiskey bonbons there, hoping they would take the bait. Detective Patara is in a bit of a different situation. So Detective Suk is investigating the murder of the inspector he looked up to, and rummaging through the inspector's locker, he finds a book of all the police staff. The inspector was trying to find out who was part of the Czechoslovakian secret police, but a couple of names are missing from this, one of which just so happens to be Detective Patara, with hush money attached. The commissioner is also working with Patara, so when Suk reveals this, they're in a very tense position. To ease those nerves, Patara shares the whiskey bonbons with them that he received from Johann disguised as his sister Anna, practically a complete stranger. Once again, when it comes to these candies, it leads to death. In both cases, the 2 parties were extremely careless. For Dr. Heinemann, it was his arrogance. For Detective Patara, it was this stress and sense of panic. And Johann uses candy as a means to take advantage of that carelessness. So this is another way that food can be associated with a form of weakness. One other thing I'd like to bring up is the series Tolka Gettan. I mentioned this a while back on other platforms, but there are a lot of different eating scenes in the series. The series director Yuji Yamaguchi explained in an Anime Age interview that this happens for 2 different reasons. The first reason being that showing characters eating creates this element of relief, and it calms the story down. The second reason is that it's an homage to historical novelist Shotaro Ikenami. In Ikenami's works, they would have these serious conversations combined with scenes of these characters eating. So, in that sense, it can create this sense of contrast, where it can make these more dramatic, stressful moments feel a lot more calm as a result. This is actually reflected in the DVD extras for the show, where scriptwriter Tomomi Mochizuki actually makes curry for Maria Yamamoto, and then both of them discuss the production aspects of the show. So once again, you get a more serious conversation backed by footage of them eating. So those were just 2 other aspects I thought would be interesting to mention, even if I couldn't really fit them into the main part of the video properly. So I hope you found it interesting, and once again, thanks for your time.